We are thrilled again, and that's not hyperbole, but very excited and honored to have Sam Dunson show his work here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Sam was actually the very first show that we ever did in this space when it got reconverted from its previous life as a bookstore. Sam's art was the first art to come into Vanderbilt Divinity School on quite that level of formality and knowledge. My friend Alushala, who was at that time a student associate of the arts program and helped very much put that show on and get it promoted through the community. So thanks again for that. But Sam has worked this year to come up with what you can see is a really unique, layered, and complex response to the events of a year past in Ferguson, Missouri. And I won't attempt to go any further than that because that will be the subject of Sam's talk. But please welcome Sam Dunson, and be ready and be welcome with your questions and comments at the end. So welcome, Sam.
Thank you, everybody. I certainly appreciate everybody coming. And I was just speaking with Dave earlier, and I was kind of telling him that I try my best to kind of create a bit of a PowerPoint presentation because I have a tendency to talk too much and kind of allow things to flow to. And I know we have a certain amount of time, so I appreciate you all coming and spending the time with me and Dave and the works. And hopefully I can leave enough time to have a conversation afterwards. Just a real little background about myself. I'm actually born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and found my way to Nashville, Tennessee through college at Tennessee State University. Actually started out as an architectural engineering major, but it was the degree that I thought and my family thought would be perfect for my artistic ability, connected with the hope and prayer that I would actually find a job afterwards, thinking as a young adult would. But I found out that it wasn't for me. It's not, not a smack on architectural engineering. It was kind of a smack on me for not doing what I needed to do to find out really what the arts were. And I actually grew up in a family that was very interested in the arts. But didn't we, and I say we, not just my parents, but we really didn't do our due diligence to find out what the arts offered. All right. So after one semester, partly due to my desire to go into art, but the other part was you have enough F's and they'll tell you you can't stay here. So I kind of moved into the art department, which was actually the best thing for me. And it really was. So fast forward to now, I'm a father of two. My wife and my children are actually in Georgia at this time. We were living here, but I commute between Georgia, Marietta, and Nashville, Tennessee. I come up on Mondays and leave on Thursdays. Kind of a little bit of a dichotomy that also helps, or has helped, this whole kind of concept of what I've been dealing with for this past year. All right, some fears and some sort of concerns and all of that might not have been as kind of on the nerve, I guess you would say, if I was actually with my family all week as opposed to half the week. So it just kind of moved me into really, really thinking about what my job is as a father. All right. So as you see, I'll start talking a little bit too much, so I'll move on into this. The concept, and I'll tell you what, in order for me not to be the kind of the focal point of this right now, just to have this, I'll sit down, but after I go through this, most definitely I'll stand up and I'll take as many questions as you all may have. So you can just bear with me just a second here. All right, so the title of the show is Meet the Fergusons. And for anybody that knows my work or has seen my work, there's a a major, sense of satire. That I'm not a very confrontational person. It's just not in my nature to confront things outside of my own work. So in my work I can be confrontational, but if I'm confrontational, there's a tendency to be considered an angry black male, all right? So I add that little bit of satire that allows people to kind of come in, and then once a person is in, I can begin to kind of speak through my work a little bit louder than I would if I were actually talking to the person myself, all right? So over this past year, there's been a couple of disturbing issues that I felt were very disturbing, not only to me, but to the nation. And to start off, I kind of chose this sort of editorial cartoon that kind of stated what kind of started this ball rolling. It starts off just sort of saying a little boy in red says, I'm sorry, holding up a newspaper, and the father trying to explain to his son that that's just one incident in one place, but how many incidents in places do you have to have before it becomes something that really affects a nation as opposed to the individual spots? So in the end, we actually see Michael Brown as sort of like the end piece, but that was sort of like the beginning of this whole thing for me. All right. Now, all these things that have been happening most definitely have been happening over the years, but when you start literally seeing it happen because of telephone, video, so on and so forth, it kind of shines a light on it, and we've kind of buried it for so long that it's kind of grown up into this thing that we can't really fully understand because we're able to see it so often. All right. So on August 9, 2014, there was a kind of a series of events that kind of took this into sort of striking me in the heart in order to do something about it, I guess you would say. So on August 9th, 2014, 11:48 a.m. to noon around in Ferguson, Missouri, an officer responds to a call of a sick person. At 11:51, another call goes out about a robbery at a convenience store. The dispatcher gives a description of the robber and says the suspect is walking toward a Quick Trip convenience store. And the last part that is important to me is that the officer encounters Michael Brown and a friend as they walk down the street. The reason that kind of becomes the impetus of everything that has happened from that point is because there was decisions to be made at that point as to where this could go as opposed to where it did go. All right. And in the entire show, it doesn't, I'm not looking to kind of point fingers directly at any one part of the community or the culture, but a decision had to be made by Michael Brown and by Darren Wilson. And I feel that the decisions of both kind of affected the nation negatively. All right. And it's not to say that one was at fault more than other, but it is to say that one is more at fault than the other when you choose sides. All right. So if we kind of close our eyes, we take race away, we'll start asking more questions, so on and so forth, but we can't take race away. I mean, it has to be there. It's a part of it. So when I started actually looking at what was going on, and I started looking at these two people, there were some similarities that were just a little too striking for me not to kind of really sort of say, how did these two people meet this path and kind of sort of collide with each other? So, I looked up Michael Brown Jr. and Darren Dean Wilson. They were almost exactly 10 years apart. All right. So we're thinking of a decade. What happens in a decade? There's maturity that happens. There's a lot of things that happen in a decade. The difference between a 10-year-old and a 20-year-old. And then we start looking at their sizes. They're about the same size. One is a lot heavier than the other, but if I can look at you in the eye, both of them are exactly 6'4". So those things were kind of bits and pieces that just kind of held my attention a little bit more than I expected. All right. And what that did is force me to kind of look at where that decision, or what that decision caused. So it's kind of like this cause and effect. not only with Darren Wilson and Michael Brown, but the idea of cause and effect for everybody else that had to make decisions from that point on. Because there was a lot of decisions that had to be made once this young man was killed on whose side am I on? Why does that even have to be a decision? Why can't we look at, and I'm not so naive or hopeful to believe that we shouldn't take sides, because I feel we should, because then we'll know that at least there's something that we need to do to kind of fix that problem. So if we don't pick sides, we can't look at both sides to sort of say, okay, where do we meet in the middle? If we're already in the middle, we can't be in the middle. So looking at that kind of dead figure that was based upon this meeting between these two, and knowing that something happened, and even with all of the facts and forensics and so on and so forth, we still don't know what happened. Right? So now that feeds that whole idea of continuing to take sides. All right. So if I show you how this person was shot, and I say, here's one person that says this person had his hands up, whereas another person is coming in and saying that, okay, I'm lunging forward, nobody knows. I mean, the conversation is there between those two people that should have made that decision, but the decision was made to actually shoot. And that causes a problem with me at this point in time, because we actually had to kind of look at these people as almost like pawns in a game, I guess you would say. And when we start looking at the people as pawns in the game, we start actually looking at how the story is no longer the story of Michael Brown's people and his parents and his family and the police department. It becomes, okay, now it's starting to drive a wedge between, a wedge that was already there, but opening up a scar that's been there for a long time between two communities that should be a little more cohesive. So I went and I found a couple of videos, so I'll just kind of be quiet here.
We had to diligently review the information that was in the tape, determine if there was any other reason to keep it. Anybody else would be charged in a crime, and we had determined that that was not going to be the case. We got a lot of Freedom of Information requests for this tape, and at some point it was just determined that we had to release it. We didn't have good cause, absent any other reason to not release it under FOI. So and decided at the same time it wouldn't be prudent to release that information, which could be a little bit I don't know. Well, we needed to release that at the same time we would release the name of the officer who was involved in the shooting, so that we could just keep open and give you all the information that we have. We've pretty much given you every bit of information that we have now. I don't think there's anything else that we have to give out.
And with that video, it was sort of like the idea of the news media attempting to say, all right, we're going to have an interview, and I'm going to show a second video, which is also from CNN, but it's almost like this idea of, in order for us to say who this person is that we've kind of been hiding, we're going to show you who this other person is and kind of feed that idea of fears and feed that idea of stereotypes and so on and so forth, that this wasn't a good guy, that this officer that we're kind of holding within our gates, this wasn't a good guy that got killed. It was almost like at that situation, this police officer didn't know that that was that person, so he didn't deal with those things. But after the fact, we had to choose a pawn, because it's now become a game. I mean, here's how this person is, and then, as I said, I'm really not using this as an opportunity to kind of look at one being right and one being wrong. We had the other side of it.
Reporting it. I've seen that Sarah Sliger joining us from Ferguson. She's got more. So what is the latest there, Sarah?
Look, the city won't confirm to us officially that it is indeed Darren Wilson, but they did send us an incident report from back in 2013, October 28th to be exact, of a citizen named Michael Armand, who has basically been contacted, come into contact with Mr. Wilson. Basically, that contact, Armand has said, he posted online the contact and confrontation between him and Officer Wilson back in 2013, complaining of his treatment by Officer Wilson, who, as you know, is the officer who is responsible for the killing of Michael Brown, and that killing has created 3 months of protest. Let me let you see the video that was posted online by a resident who came into contact with Officer Wilson.
What's your name, sir? Sir, I'm not taking a picture. I'm reporting this incident, sir. Do I not have the right to record? Come on. Sir, you just allowed me.
Now, that resident was arrested on other charges. And again, the city says because of the quality of that video, it cannot confirm to us that that is indeed Officer Wilson. We talked to the ACLU about what was said by that officer. The ACLU saying, look, they can't say whether or not it's Wilson, but they can certainly say this, that what was said, that the officer basically said, I can arrest you for recording video of me, was absolutely improper and a violation of that citizen's rights.
So we have this idea of do we kind of report the news or do we make the news? And the problem is that kind of understanding is in all of us. Am I reporting, am I getting all the information and just sort of saying this is what happened, or am I taking parts of the information and showing you what I want you to know or what I want you to see? And I purposely chose, not purposely chose CNN, but I purposely chose one media outlet to show that they're actually feeding both sides of this. Because if they're feeding, then who's being fed? We're the ones that are actually being fed, and we're continuing to look. And then we start to look for that divisiveness to be in the news. If there was a news network that actually showed both and just put it out on the table, it probably would die on the vine because it wasn't choosing pawns. So this idea of us choosing these things is something that's in our nature. And that's what scares me. This is what actually gets to the heart of everything that I've actually done, is what's in our nature. And knowing that I'm a father and I have to kind of create a cohesive, as much as I can create a cohesive nature for my children, then when I look at Michael Brown, I can't help but to see my son. All right? Michael Brown being 18, 6'4", big, dark-skinned young man. And even in the news media, when you see some of the images, he's lightened up. He looks, kind of a little bit different, because the one side really wants us to see him not as the news kind of shows, but as we want him to be. Darren Wilson is kind of shown as not who the news wants to be, it's who we want to be. So we had people that are on one side kind of showing the best, but showing the worst. And then we have the people on the other side showing the best and showing the worst. So it's almost like conflict was built in this between the decision between those two people. And when I look at my son, this is a picture from a couple of years ago. I never knew that a boy could grow that fast, but he's 13 years old. He's going to be 14 next week, but he's already 6 feet tall and 245 pounds. So let's say in 4 more years, I don't think he's going to be 6'4", but I mean, that possibility is there because my wife's side are all giants. So the possibility is there. But he's just going to get larger, and he's going to remain as dark as he is. And he is the most gentle person, except on the football field. He's all right on the football field. He's a little bit meaner. but in society, he's a gentle, loving person, which Michael Brown could have been, most definitely a gentle, loving person. All right? Most definitely he was to certain people. But that didn't matter at that point in time. So if my son falls into a mistake, I don't want him to die for that mistake. All right? I'd rather him be able to walk away, learn from it, but not die from that mistake. So I can't help but to start choosing sides. So if I'm looking at the news and saying, man, why, I know my community needs to do some work, and I know the police need to do some work for us to get together, but I'm looking at Michael Brown in my house. So I have to deal with that. I'm sorry. It bothers me. I'm sorry. I never heard myself say it like that. But I have to deal with those things. Yeah. This was my outlet of being able to deal with that issue that is growing in my house. My daughter too, most definitely. She's 17 years old. She's going to be leaving the home. And there are black women that are being killed just like black men. And I have to be concerned about that. So what do I do? And I'm not a confrontational person. So I have to have my work to confront an issue. And I'm sorry, folks. But when I start looking at those issues and how I'm seeing the shots that are actually being fired at this young man, they're also being fired at my son. So what I did to start this whole thing in the first kind of series of this work was based upon that concept or that idea that Michael Brown being shot because he looks like my son looks like him, is a bit of collateral damage. So what I did is played with, you can just barely see it in the backdrop. You can kind of see the drawings that I put in the backdrop that become the little areas where it says pow, 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 are areas where Michael Brown was shot. And I put that image in the back behind my son. And in situations, you might see him, he's going to take those shots just like Michael Brown did. And so in the areas where those shots were fired, if I overlap my son, the person that I'm seeing daily, and I look through him to see Michael Brown, I can't help but to see that he's being affected by the same things that Michael Brown is being affected by. And those shots that were fired at him are also being shot at my son. And some of them are going to hit. And some people looked at the image and kind of looked at it as, well, you're doing the same thing because you're making one side darker than the other. When I literally painted the piece, there was no choice on color. It was the idea of life. And there's blood flowing through my son. That blood is red. So on one side, I base the portrait as being much more red, or a family or a palette of reds. Whereas if we look at the idea of death, it's cold. I mean, so blues and greens was a palette I chose for the other side. So it just happens to be one takes upon a look and feel of being a little bit colder than the other. But I love my son's color. He's quite a bit darker than me. And I was raised in a family that loved our color. I mean, the deepness of it, the richness of it, so on and so forth. So when I see him, I'm seeing both sides as being a part of him, that there's this part that can't help but to be dead or dying or decaying along with that life. So that is what kind of affected me. And like I said, I apologize for I didn't mean to break down or anything. But so I start looking at my son, and it doesn't say I'm dismissing my daughter whatsoever, but he's looking at me in my eye. And so my past is kind of looking at me. And sitting in a car with my father and having a police officer pull us over because your purple kind of mauve Cadillac happened to be in a wrong place at the wrong time, when I've never seen a Cadillac of that color that my father had anywhere. So a police stopping us and me not even understanding and seeing in my father's face that I can tell that he was changed at that point. And he probably wasn't changed because of him, because he grew up in the, deep South, in the, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it was changed because of me. And I never expected to actually have to deal with that. This incident made me deal with that idea of seeing that in my son and seeing him look at me in my face. All right. So yes, my daughter is most definitely part of it, but I had to put the part in that kind of shows that we are just as at fault for things as the police department. So with these three pieces, what I did is actually dealt with the idea of each segment of that society has to take some onus in order to heal, as opposed to continuing to butt heads. So the one on the far left, titled Like Shooting Dreams in a Barrel, kind of deals with that idea of how the police may, or the authorities may see our people as there's fullness of those dreams and so on and so forth. And there's jumping, and there's beauty, and there's fun, and there's even with the kind of some systems in my works that are kind of symbolic. So clouds have it's kind of take an opportunity to either be something that is without form, but it's also something we strive towards, right? Reaching for the clouds, reaching for the skies, but it's also smoke, so it can choke. So it sort of plays on this idea of a lot of information in that piece kind of plays with symbolism and systems, but it's based upon this idea of that freedom that's being shot. But on the other side, I can't help but to say that at some point in time, we have to get up off our knees and actually get some type of work done to help the community. Whether that's Black Lives Matter, whether that's, the community getting together a little bit further, and not to point fingers, but to actually mend and fix ourselves. So on the other side, I actually have a figure, sort of and I intentionally made him sort of a lighter skinned figure, but that is almost slothful, all right? He's on his knees, he has his hands behind his back, but he's not shackled at all. And he has the ability to pull the cloak off over the cloak off of his eyes. He has the ability to get up off his knees and actually work and do some things to make things right. But there's a choice that sometimes is made not to do that, all right? And yes, I just had a long conversation with my daughter with the idea of what actually built that idea and that concept and the foundations that were actually created in order to make a people not want to work as hard or not want to do the things. So it's understandable, most definitely. But at some point in time, we have to get up, we have to work, we have to do these things in order to make life better for us without expecting either the government or any other entity to do those things. And the beautiful thing is we've done that before. In our history, we've done it before, thousands and thousands of times. This whole situation might be that impetus to get us to do it again. So I didn't want to make this idea that, okay, I'm just pointing fingers at one. No, I know that we have to do some work too. So in the middle, I create the image tête-à-tête, which is kind of the idea of a sort of French term of coming together, all right? Sort of a meeting of the minds. But I chose to actually say it the French way because if I say it head to head, that's conflict. All right, so I changed it to tête-à-tête, which is a meeting of the minds. Here, when we use it in English, we say have a heart-to-heart. So what I did is put either the bullseye. I have a lot of symbols that can go both ways. It's either a target or a bullseye. All right. So if I'm shooting at a target, usually it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to hit you in the heart. But if I'm trying to get to you, to your heart, then I'm going to try to hit you in the bullseye. Either one is hitting you in the center, but it's just how you kind of take that idea. All right. So I wanted to show that it's necessary for those things to happen. So what I did is actually blanked out both of the figures, and you don't know what their hands are doing intentionally. We don't know if their hands are behind their back. Sort of saying, I'm here with a tête-à-tête, but I'm crossing my fingers, so whatever I say is not really real. Or are their hands in their pockets? Are they doing, but they are facing each other. And so I wanted to make sure that there's a number of the pieces in here that kind of deal with sort of the community and what we need to do, and kind of some parts of the community that are kind of being dealt or dealing with us. And from this time, that's where this kind of angst began in the works. My works here are a little less satirical, a little less kind of comical than they usually are. And it was just due to the fact that there's this angst that's kind of built up in me. And I don't mind it building up in me, because then I know I have to function with it, and I have to digest it, and I have to understand it, and kind of understand what to do with it. If I try to push it away, more than likely, I mean, if I try to push it away, anything you try to push away is going to come back harder. I have this whole thing in mind that my father told me: the harder you push, the harder something is going to push against it. So I accept it, that there's this angst, that I'm angry, I'm mad, and I'm allowed to be, because that lets me digest this information and try to do something with it. So I started looking at how we're looked at as sort of revelers versus rioters. All right, this whole idea of the black youth that were in Baltimore and Ferguson and so many other times and so many other places. Why do we burn down our own places? Because that's the only thing that we can actually show that kind of is ours. I mean, so if I have a room in my parents' house, if I mess my own room up because I'm pissed off and I'm mad, it really makes my parents madder than if I were to go out somewhere else and do it. And so if I mess up my own, but there's this idea of what people call that. There's this idea of, all right, these are rioters, but what happens if I'm sort of joyous and having fun, and I start messing up things? Then that's a reveler. And so these words that were being used versus young black people versus young white people, there were these issues that were just kind of eating me up. All right, and the fact that right before, and some of these things may seem a little bit disjointed, but I'm trying to make sense of them myself. I mean, in the meantime, I'm still trying to make sense of them. In the midst of all this, of sort of seeing, anger and titles and names being put to that anger, worse titles being put to the anger that looks like me than others, then I started kind of looking at how many people are being looked at with that same type of anger. So how could a police officer go out and be nice to a group that he feels is angry? If I push, there's going to be something that pushes back just as hard. So I started looking at the gentleman, John Crawford III, that was shot right before Michael Brown in Dayton, Ohio, and was like, man, this actually is hitting me where I was born and raised. That could have been me. But it just sort of seemed like a number of names just kept coming up. Continually. From Michael Brown, it was just continually happening. So it wasn't like anybody was really doing much to change this. It was like, okay, here's a picture, here's a name, bam, we're putting it out, and just keep putting it out, and just keep allowing it to happen. Then we have to start questioning what's happening, what's going on. And the problem is, anytime we continually see this happening, people are starting to now re-up their defenses. As opposed to coming together, it's almost like, okay, we're going to make sure our defenses are even stronger, so when that other group comes over, we're going to fight harder. As opposed to finding out what can be done to kind of clean this up. And the last one, I'm sorry. Let me go back there. The last one just happened 1 year. So within 1 year of me kind of creating most of these, actually with the exception of one there, creating all these works, almost a year to the date, we had another incident. August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was killed. August 7th, 2015, Christian Taylor was killed. So it's almost like, what has happened in that year? Kind of nothing. There's still anger, there's still all these things that are going on, but nothing really has kind of happened. So in doing this presentation, when I started kind of putting these things together, I started seeing that all of those names, and because I'm a visual person, just becomes white noise. And not literally just, no pun intended at all, but the more names I stack on top of each other, I could just have one name and it's going to have the same effect because nobody's listening. All right. Everybody's hearing, but nobody's really listening, because if you listen, you kind of have to do something about it. You can't just let that fester in you and keep going. So I just started packing these names over the top of each other, and nobody is seen. Everybody is seen, but nobody is looked at. Nobody is really paid attention to. So it just becomes almost like this white noise that, okay, here's another one shot today. Okay, let's, were we eating tonight? Here's another one shot today. Okay, well, I'll see you this evening at, here's another one shot today. Oh, well, the Voice is on tonight. What do we? So it's almost like, okay, it's just this, it just kind of, those names become kind of voices that kind of just fade away in the wind. And they're not really paid attention to. So that angst kind of brought me to this whole idea of another title for this little slide was like, okay, the request made by a camel, don't give me any more straws. The next one's going to break my back. So Baltimore happens. No, I'm sorry, Baltimore riots, if you want to call it, happens. Don't let it happen again, because it's going to boil over to something else. Something's going to happen that is going to amp it up. It's going to take it to a point where we didn't know that it could go. And we've been in the country for centuries and seen a lot of things happen, but that next thing might be the worst one, and if we don't start kind of listening to it. So the question that I have for myself is, with all this angst and all these things that are kind of going on, and these are, I mean, this is not just through the words, these are like conversations that I have with my wife. I mean, right now, I mean, I was born in 1970, so I've been called nigger. I mean, I played hockey, I mean, in Dayton, Ohio, I mean, from 3rd grade to 12th, so it was like almost maybe once a game. so it wasn't anything kind of unfamiliar, but when I'm starting to look at things now, it's almost like I'm afraid, and maybe because of my son and daughter, all right? Because I know that they have to actually go out into this world, and I'm not sure what they're going to be meeting when they actually hit those doors, because they are so giving. Now, I'm a father, I'm biased, but they're giving, and they care, and I want them to do that. But I have to almost breed a little bit in them to have some anger and some understanding. As I said, I just had a long conversation with my daughter that dealt with the whole idea of the kind of the truth that I've learned about slavery and so many other things. That was just, I had to have an ugly conversation with my daughter. So all these things kind of happening, and knowing that she has to go out, and I don't want to plant a seed of anger and distrust and hate in her, but she has to understand how great she can be in spite of all of this mess that's going on. So I'm just wanting her to kind of know what's going on. So where do we go from here? I mean, I always get Renee Magritte and Manet mixed up. So I was in here during the reception saying, yeah, I pulled from Manet to, like, then I went and I was like, man, you're supposed to be an art professor. You talk, getting some of these most important artists still mixed up. So where I go from here is starting to deal with these issues. And if I let it fester in me, then I can't live. I mean, I don't like dying things in me. I just don't like dying ideas. I don't like things that are sort of decaying, because they stink. They don't allow for any type of growth at all. So what I do as an artist, I begin to kind of take ideas and pull them into me in order to have some self-therapy, in order to deal with the issues that I have to deal with. So when I'm starting to look at images, and I love researching, I love looking at imagery, I love looking at artists' lives. So Renee Magritte's The Son of Man kind of brought me, and like I said, I'm not trying to kind of explain the pieces. I just want to kind of show you what I'm dealing with and give you some systems of things that I use over and over again and kind of play with. And that allows us to have a conversation about the works, as opposed to me telling you what you're supposed to get from them. All right, that's not a good thing for me. So I changed the idea of the Son of Man. I put this image of this this sort of clean-cut black male in the space of Baltimore. I mean, the Baltimore incident. I'm sorry, I'm getting in Ferguson, as we said, Quick Trip was where Michael Brown was supposedly at. I mean, that he was supposedly had stolen something, and the video shows. So I would say supposedly. Yes, there was. I mean, he was young. There's some issues. There were some issues there apparently, but that became sort of the the fertile ground for all this mess to kind of happen. So what happens if I take the name of Greets, the son of man, change the title to that son of a blank, or the son of a blank, put Ferguson behind him, put his hopes and his dreams, his head's in the clouds? What happens if I do that? Ferguson made that young man, which probably had a lot of potential, become more confrontational, because he had to have seen people on the news that are looking at him as being those people. Those people do that. So in order to fight back, then he has to become that. All right. So even though his head is in the clouds, where you can't really see his expression, you don't really know what he is, then he's showing you what he's become. On the other end of the scope, and I don't like solid answers in my work. So the other is, who are we looking at? We don't know who this person is. But since he's in that situation, then there's a possibility that he is that type of person. So the thing that we're going to see is that animal in him, that fear. And fear kind of makes people strike out a whole lot more than just confrontation and desire to actually be an animal. All right. So specifically using terms such as animal, and sort of give us an idea of what this person feels like he has become. You're going to back me into a corner, I'm going to strike out at you. I don't care if I'm non-confrontational, if I'm the nicest person in the world, but you back me in a corner, I'm going to have to come out at you. But who's on the other side that I'm coming out at? In the middle of both of them is that idea of who this person actually is. So kind of dealt with that. So there's some other systems that I'm kind of dealing with within the works. There's sort of a whole idea of this idea of threes. Sort of 3 points creating a triangle, sort of beginning, middle, end, continuity, all of those ideas. I don't try to solve completely in my work, but I try to give an out to a person that has come in. Because like I said, my work is satirical, but when you're in, if it's hitting you a little too hard, then I want you to be able to leave and be okay with actually leaving, as opposed to leaving and saying, well, this dude is just a mad person, he's angry, and I want some solutions to be kind of put into the piece. So I'm starting to kind of deal with threes and triangles and circles, especially in the back two pieces that kind of deal with family, and the back, it's sort of like this idea of all of this destruction and all of these things that are happening can only be dealt with based upon connections, as opposed to people pushing each other apart. And I don't particularly say that family just has to be, my mother, my father, me, my sister, so on and so forth. We are truly all one family. We're a dysfunctional family, but we're a family. So I wanted to show in those pieces my son, myself, and my father, and then my daughter, my wife, and my mother-in-law, and kind of show that there's a continuity between those things that I want to confront people with. You have to look past, and I'll say this and then I'll kind of be quiet, I guess. You would forcibly have to have to tell yourself to look past that family in order to see the destruction. And the piece right here is confrontational, and you kind of get the destruction, but you're confronted with them. But you have to literally tell yourself, I'm going to look past these people to see the destruction. If you look past them, then you've made a decision, just like Darren Wilson and Michael Brown, to see the ugliness as opposed to seeing what the possibilities are. So that's, in the end, what I'm trying to do is actually build my family, my son and my daughter, to have both. The idea of that triangle as being something strong, that circle as being something cyclical, a cycle, something that they can actually continue and move. I'm wanting both of them to get that from my wife and I, and actually, if they ever have children, to have them be as kind and as gentle, but as sort of deeply steeped in their history and heritage, so they'll know what to do when adversity comes and hits them in the face. All right. And that's it. All right. I hope I didn't take too long. All right. But I'll most definitely I'll answer any questions that you all have. I guess I should stand up now. I guess I've been sitting for a long time. So if you have any questions at all, I'd love to answer. And this is that awkward time where if you don't have any questions at all, that's fine too. Yes, sir.
The piece on the far end.
Yes.
Yeah. I may have tuned out for a second, but I don't think you addressed that one in your. So what's going on with this? And I asked from my past sort of observations of your work over time. The first piece of yours that I ever saw that really and it grabbed my attention dramatically at the time was your sort of your cartoonisms.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And you've sort of tapped that down a little bit for this presentation.
Yes.
But it's back in sort of all of its glory with that one piece. So,
Right.
Yeah. Did you decide to go light on that aspect of your?
Yeah. And actually, it's strange to say that, but the other pieces are a little more saline than this one. So kind of that duality is not, I mean, it's apparent in the clouds and so on and so forth. That, I mean, kind of little bubble gum that I have to put into the pieces to make me feel good, I guess. Whereas this one, it was so confrontational that I had to kind of amp up the other part of it, to kind of allow that to come in. So it's almost the idea of what is a little slice of heaven, and sort of say, well, that's one thing that we always say, we want our own little slice of heaven where we can kind of, sort of grow and live out our lives and so on and so forth. This little slice of purgatory right now is what's happening, and it doesn't seem like it's ending. So what I did, when Walter Scott was killed, and I can't remember the date, so I apologize about that. And he was one of the unarmed black men that was killed within this year. His family said that they shot him down, or the police shot him down like a dog. And this was the incident where the police actually picks up his gun and puts it next to Walter Scott's. And his family basically said that he was shot down like a dog. And it just hit me, like a brick, because it was like, with our culture and our community, if it had been a dog, he wouldn't have been shot. So it was sort of like the idea of how do I kind of make the little baby Jesus of the purgatory for this particular purgatory that we're in. What does that kind of little baby Jesus look like for our purgatory right now with this particular situation? In order to make the police officer ecstatic, then I take the little baby Jesus and I draw a dog face on a box and I pop it on his head, and now everything's okay. Walter isn't shot, everything's fine. But we know that if we hold the person's feet to the fire, we know that is basically still hell going on around him. And what I did, and what I usually do with my works is, I don't give previews to what I'm thinking about, but just through working through the works, I can't help but to start pulling ideas to move forward. So what I did is actually looked at the address where Eric Garner was killed. And he was the gentleman that was killed. The whole idea of I can't breathe, where he was killed. I looked on Google Maps and found out the spot or the space where he was killed. And it might have been before he was killed. That image was probably taken before he was killed, but it was sanitized. It didn't seem like anything was going on, everything was all right. So I wanted to burn that building down. And so I put that building, this is actually the face or the facade of that building, which kind of becomes a symbol for all of this kind of hell that's going on. I put that building in and I allowed that to burn along with everything else. And that kind of has kind of moved me into this whole idea of what black history is, in order to kind of create, if hell is going to happen, everything kind of burns out, we're going to have to create a new history for people in the future. So since at this point in time, there is no history, this is my thinking, from this point on, there's no history, then I have to create a new black history. So I'm going to take the B out and say, since we don't have history, we lack history, as opposed to black history. So these series of works that I'm kind of moving towards now are looking at different, all of these places where these people were killed. I want to, look on Google Maps and kind of find out where they are, kind of serve them as the landscape that all of this stuff is happening on, because we have to create a new history. So this is the new landscape. And from those landscapes, I'm just going to start mixing sort of griot-like ideas from history that doesn't exist anymore, because this is the start of it, and just start mixing all of these ideas. So when I have somebody, what happens if I have a person, a slave, sort of playing jazz, or a slave playing basketball, or a slave actually sitting behind a desk as a business person? With a watermelon, all these stereotypes. With chicken on the desk and watermelon, and sort of how do you deal with that, with this new history that's going to be going on, to make it beautiful? Because if one way of sanitizing things is to kind of wash it away with water, the other type is burn it down. So let's burn it down and let's start anew. And so this kind of moves me into kind of a new series of works that I'm going to be dealing with. Yeah. I didn't mean to get too long into it.
Is the Lincoln image, is that sort of in that same?
Yeah, he's gonna show up too. But yeah, he's the kind of that idea of freedom. Who they always say, okay, Lincoln's freed the slaves, and I just heard all of the kind of things that kind of went into that concept. And there were a number of people that made that happen. There was a number of incidents that made it happen that was just as much business as sort of, the idea of being abolitionists. It was sort of good for, his party politically. So there was a whole bunch of things, but he's the stamp of the idea of freedom. So we have to have him in there, because he's just as much of a stereotypical character as Sambo is. I know it sounds, some people would say that's kind of harsh to say that, but if I look at what it took to make sure that black people saw that they were not superior, in fact inferior, then I have to take everything and kind of make it look as if it's less important. And so when I think about watermelon, and I actually heard that watermelon was one of the fruits that kind of came across in slave ships. You start thinking about it, okay, the water content was necessary, and the fruit content was necessary, so it saved us. But you see a black person watermelon, stereotype. So
being saved for what?
Say it again.
Being saved for what?
Exactly, and that's the question. But if it didn't happen, we wouldn't be here. And I hate to say it, I'm a quote-unquote proud American. But I'm able to say that due to the fact that I know there was ugliness that happened for me to get to this point where I can say and do this. I don't kind of black out this whole idea that ugliness, death, specifically trying to kill my people off, was basically justified by the government. Pretty much. But I'm here. All right? And I'm able to do some things that I may not have been able to do had I not had that strength built into my family. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So I'm proud because, I'm actually, if anybody has ever seen Fannie Lou Hamer, she's actually a cousin of mine. So when I think of Mammy, and I'm sorry, I'm saying Fannie Lou Hamer. Oh man, my mind, I'm getting a little bit older now. The female character, first black woman to win an Oscar for Gone with the Wind.
Oh,
I said Fannie Lou Hamer. Now I can't even remember. Oh man.
Yeah.
But if you know who I'm talking about, that is a family member of mine. So even the idea of mammies, when I see all these mammies and these stereotypical figures, I see my family. I can't help but to see that. So knowing that there was a government that literally tried to make sure that we saw that we were less, and can't help but to say, I mean, we have strived enough to where we are at least at the starting block now. So being able to, if you get me at the starting block, now I might be able to beat you. So it's just that kind of play. And so all of the Lincoln and, I mean, mammies and, I mean, watermelon and all these fried chicken, banjos. All right, thank you, sir. All these things have to be part of this new history, but I'm going to change it up enough to where it becomes something a little bit different than it was. I have to have the ugliness and the dirt to kind of create a new foundation. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm wondering about this piece over here, the R exclamation point F, and I love the blood on the American flag there, and well, it makes me think of professor in Canada, and he has this Ronaldo Walcott. He talks about Black life in the Western Hemisphere starting at the point of death, and physical death, spiritual death, social death, certainly,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean that sort of, and we think of, and I mean of the American flag not just representing the United States, but really the American flag as sort of a colonizing force for not only the Western Hemisphere but the globe, in a sense, and sort of Black life or people of color's lives starting at this point of death.
Yes. Yeah.
And sort of this perpetual death from forever. And in a sense, we're always having to recreate history because it's already been erased.
Right.
But, and sort of, you know, that cloud. But I want to know what those letters and.
It actually means it's a play on RIP, sort of the rest in peace, but it's resistance is futile. And I take the I and turn it upside down and create it as an explanation point. So it's almost this idea that, okay, just due to the fact that all of those things have happened, I mean, the blood of these people are flowing in. This is America. All right. This person that was killed, he's an American. All right. So the idea of for so long has been, if you don't toe that line that you don't even know exists, then here's the result of it. So resistance to understanding that that line exists is going to be futile. Because you step over that, there's a possibility that you're going to be killed. Some people don't even know that that line exists. And the people that do know that that line exists are probably worse off than the people that don't know it exists. So if I know that if I step past this point, I'm either having to make a decision on stepping past and becoming confrontational, considered confrontational, or not stepping to it and becoming a step and fetch it. So it's sort of like this whole concept of understanding that once you step past that line, resistance to whatever happens past that point is going to end in futility. So what I did is actually took Michael Brown, took him off of the street, because he laid there and was allowed to actually bleed out for a long period of time. A second is too long, but he lay there for a long period of time. Yeah. So I wanted to take him and pick him up along with the blood and dump him in a neighborhood. And for this, I looked in Missouri and near Ferguson for one of the nicer neighborhoods, what you want to say, and say, since this is America, I'm going to dump him there and let's see what happens at that point. Since it's futile, since he's already past that point, he's already dead. So, like you said, let's let something else live from this, if not to do anything but to start a conversation about it. So yeah, and I wanted to kind of play with that idea of it being a cloud, but it's also kind of a like one of those little statement clouds, as much as a life moving away from. I mean, and just to let you know, put it dead center. I mean, it's one of those things where I kind of measured all that, where, I mean, some things that don't even seem like they're really part of it. I wanted to seem to where in this one you can't look past that. You see this big figure, and I mean, hopefully everybody sees. I blew him up. I made him much larger. If he stood up, he'd be almost as tall as the house. And so this idea is what's really large, but he looks like he fits. It almost seems like he fits well in it, unfortunately. And so I wanted to actually show that this was, I mean, if I showed him on the street and I put that there, it would say that to the black community. If I do it in the suburban nice area, I'm saying this is what's happening. Knock on the door, open up. This is what you're kind of walking into, what's been created.
Well, and that's also Venetia McBride, right? I mean, she stopped looking for help and got shot down in front of someone's neck.
Exactly. Exactly. I didn't even think of it that way. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the idea, she walked over the line. Yeah.
Looking for help.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I hope after a certain amount of time that the angst that I feel right now, I mean, excuse me, but it feels good because I rarely have it. My family is a very helpful family. I mean, during Katrina, my mother and my sisters went down and helped out as much as they could, but I'm not confrontational. I didn't want to see that. And it makes me sick to my stomach that I don't do the same things that my mother and my sisters do. And my father he's much like me. He kind of sits back, but he feels like he allows them to travel wherever they want to. But for me, it was a point. I didn't go to the Million Man March. I didn't do this. I didn't do that, and it pisses me off. So this little bit of angst that I feel feels good because I'm dealing with it now. All right. So as long as I can deal with it, then I can actually move through it and get something from it. Yeah. Yep.
Sam?
Thank you.
Just to sort of tie our day, for those who were there in our chapel service this morning, we had an emphasis on the prophetic and how that is sort of in the DNA and the fabric of this institution. And I want to thank you for bringing your prophetic gift
thank you.
in these works, and also for opening up your heart and instructing us on the complexity of creativity. Putting your family in it, putting your children in it really explodes these works for me into a much larger scope.
Oh, thank you.
And at the same time, a much smaller and dearer idea as well. So you've instructed us in a number of ways this morning, and with the works themselves. Again, we really are honored, and it's a privilege to have them.
Well, thank you.
Here, especially because of that prophetic quality that you bring to your work. So I just want to say from all of us, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, you allowed that to breed in this place. So I mean, I appreciate and I thank you for everything that you've done over the years that allows me. I mean, Dave has never said, okay, what are you putting in here? I mean, so it's the allowance for that to happen is something that's special to me, and I certainly appreciate it as well. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. And again, I hate being emotional when so I hate apologizing.